Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So today our group will be presenting the topic of reformation of United Nations Security Council. So for the table of content, first we have introduction mainly about the UNSC, and then the issues that are related to the veto power, and then the reform and why it needs reform, as well as conclusion. So, first of all, what is United Nations Security Council, or UNSC? So, the UNSC is one of the six principal organs of the UN, charged with ensuring international peace and security, recommending the admission of the new UN members to the General Assembly, and approving any change to the UN Charter. And then, who are the members of UNSC? So basically, the council is composed of 15 members, and then there are 5 permanent members, which are China, France, Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Meanwhile, for the 10 non-permanent members, they are elected for 2-year terms by the General Assembly with end of term year. And then moving on to the right to the veto. So what is the veto power? So the United Nations Security Council veto powers refers to the power of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, which is China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US. To veto any substantive resolution. And then it was agreed by the drafters that if any one of the 5 permanent members cast a negative vote in the 15-member Security Council, then the resolution or decision will not be approved. And then all 5 members have exercised the right of veto at one time or another. And then if a permanent members does not fully agree with a proposed resolution, but does not wish to cast a veto, it may choose to abstain, thus allowing the resolution to be adopted if it obtains the required number of 9 favorable votes. So what are the issue of the veto power? So actually, the veto power is quite controversial. When we look at the perspective of their supporters, they regard it as a promoter of international stability, a check against military interventions, and a critical safeguard against the US domination. But on the other hand, critics say that the veto power is the most undemocratic element of the UN, as well as the main cause of inaction on war crimes and crimes against humanity. And then it effectively prevents UN action against the permanent members and their allies. Moving on to the functions and powers of UNSC. So the Security Council respond to crises around the world on a case-by-case basis, and it has a range of options at its disposal. And it takes many different factors into account when considering the establishment of a new peace operation. And then the Security Council establish a peace operation by adopting a Security Council resolution. So the resolution sets out that the mission's mandate and size. And then the Security Council monitor the work of the UN peace operation on ongoing basis, including through periodic reports from the Secretary General and by holding dedicated Security Council season to discuss the work of specific operation. And then the Security Council can vote to extend, amend, or end mission mandates as it deems appropriate. And then under the Article 25 of the Charter, all the UN members agree to accept and carry out the decision of the Security Council. And then, while other organs of the UN make a recommendation to member states, the Security Council alone has the power to take decision which member states are obligated to implement.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Fawaz Amshar bin Ghazali. My metric number is 1916675. I will explain to you about United Nations and Security Council issue. And my part will explain to you about Uyghur and Chinese conflict. But first, I will explain to you about Uyghur history. Okay, let's begin. Since around 2017, China government has detained at least 1 million Uyghur in internment camps in the northwest province of Xinjiang. Okay, according to satellite image, there are at least 85 camps in the province. China government ruled by Communist Party of China, or we call CCP, claims the camps are re-education camps to deliver a curriculum that includes a standard spoken and written Chinese, understanding of the law, and vocational skills. However, reports indicates that Chinese authorities forcibly removed Uyghur from their homes and put them in arbitrary detention without criminal charges in internment camps. There are reports of torture, sexual harassment, and forced labor at the camp in an effort to pressure Uyghur to denounce their culture and religion. Okay, in addition, Chinese authorities are imposing forced birth control on Uyghur women, such as forced abortion and sterilization, which is a genocidal attempt to suppress the population. It is also reported that the CCP used software hidden in apps as well as websites to stock and gather data on the Uyghur population as early as 2013. Okay, next. According to this mounting evidence, China is violating international human rights law. Okay, China has ratified several human rights treaties, including the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, or CAT, and the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, or CERD. Okay, China's ratification of these treaties means it is legally bound to their general purpose as well as their provision excluding any reservation. Moreover, China abused against the Uyghur are rising to the level of genocide and crimes against humanity, both of which violate jus cogens. What is jus cogens? Okay, jus cogens are peremptory norms under international law, and no states can derogate from these norms. China is violating its obligation under international law with little avenues of accountability. Okay, next. China urged the United Nations, Germany, and Britain to cancel an upcoming video conference on Beijing's crackdown on the Uyghur Muslim minority and call on other UN members not to attend the event. The video conference China diplomatic mission make a statement to the United Nations says is based on sheer lies and political bias. Okay, Beijing urged the co-sponsors to immediately cancel this event, which interfere in a China internal affairs and call on other member states to reject the event. The the United States recently declared that the treatment of Uyghur is genocide. Nevertheless, this is what China's response. The US claims to care about the human rights of Muslim people, despite the well-known fact that the US has been killing Muslims in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. China also said it is the US and its followers that have killed the largest numbers of Muslims in the world. So, here we can see that China easily used their veto power to cancel the video conference and also influence other member states to reject the event. Of course, they do this because they want to close and did not want to get accused from what they're doing by acting like an innocent by giving nonsense excuses on what they have done to the Uyghur. This veto system gives a lot of wrong benefit to the country that have veto power, which can do whatever they please, even they doing crimes. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Azaf Yazman bin Idris, 1918341, and I will talk about the Palestine-Israel conflict within the context of US veto power. As a permanent member of the Security Council, The US frequently used its veto power to block resolution, which is critical to Israel. Since 1972, United States has cast its veto more than 79 times to shield Israel from Security Council draft resolution that condemn, demand, call on, and urge Israel to obey the world body. Allowing the US to have an endless veto over Palestine's desired statehood appears to be a misuse of power. Palestine possesses all the qualifications for statehood: a permanent pollution, a defined territory which is recognized as demarcated by 1976 border, a functional government, and the capacity to enter into relation with other states. Moreover, Palestine has a non-member state status in the UN and a member of UNESCO and also ICJ, International Court of Justice. However, the US continues to block the membership of Palestine in the UN despite the fact that 119 states have already recognized it. The Palestinian state, the US take the position that Palestine achieving statehood would only worsen the situation between Palestine and Israel, and thus it believed that the only solution for Israelis and Palestinians to negotiate and come to the mutual understanding that Palestine is a state. However, these negotiations have been ongoing for a year, but without any positive conclusion. The next one is we will be moving on to the new issue, which is after the US prevented an unified statement asking for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The UN Security Council had its third emergency meeting in a week. This time in the midst of murderous Israeli attack in Gaza. UNSC, UN Security Council, opened debate on the tension between Israel and Palestine amid the former attacks ended with no concrete outcome. In his addresses, Palestinian Foreign Minister described Israeli attack on occupied territories of Palestine as a war crime and urged UNSC to impose sanctions and arm embargo on Tel Aviv. Israel has justified its bombing campaign as a retaliation to rocket attacks by Hamas fighters, but Gaza-based Hamas movement said its action were a response to the Israeli policy of forced displacement of Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem and storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque by Israeli forces. Israel had missed a Hamas deadline to withdraw its forces from the mosque compound. The latest round of inaction also comes as US President Joe Biden has given no sign of plans to step up public pressure on Israel, instead repeatedly stressing Israel's right to defend itself. China criticized the United States for its role in the Middle East tension, adding that its veto has paralyzed the Security Council. The next event, which is the Great March of Return. Palestinians in Gaza began protesting at the Israeli border fence in March 2018, calling for the right of return to Israel's home, from which their family were expelled in 1948 during what Palestinians call the Nakba, or the creation of the State of Israel. The UN estimates 750,000 Palestinians were expelled that year. Palestinians faced sniper fire from Israeli force during the year-long protest, which killed at least 266 people and injured roughly 300,000 more. Palestinians and their supporters said most of the protesters were unarmed civilians and Israel was using excessive force against them. The UNSC drafted a resolution on June 1, 2018, expressing the serious concern over the protests began, as well as deep alarm over the loss of civilization and the high number of casualties among the Palestinian civilians, particularly in Gaza Strip, including casualties among children caused by Israeli force. The US vetoed the resolution, which then US ambassador to the UN saying it, a clear one-sided view of what has taken in Gaza or UN is incredibly biased toward Israel. Such prejudice will not be tolerated by US, which is why they did not hesitate to use their veto and blame Hamas for the violence. But at the same time, this veto used to save the Israel from the resolution, and the act of violence from Israel are now neutralized. Thank you.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muaz bin Arzam, metric number 1917697. So I'll be explaining on some of the idea to reform or improve the current UNSC or the UN Charter or the United Nations Security Council. The first idea is by doing an anonymous voting. The second is a democratic process, the proper way of democratic process. The third one, by changing the structure of the UNSC or the UN Charter that needed to be amended. And lastly is by emphasizing on international peacekeeping. So firstly is by doing an anonymous voting. You see, the main issue in the voting system in the UNSC is when other countries are afraid to have a different opinion from the five of the permanent members in the UNSC, such as UK, Russia, US, because they are the major power in the world and they don't want any conflict with them. So in the end, they will just needed to follow what this big country decision. So by doing this type of system, the essence of anonymous voting, um, no country will have conflict because they don't know who are against them. Um, well, this type of thing will there's of course there are flaw in this type of system, but ultimately the objective of UN is to avoid conflict while having a majority opinion. So I think this is one of the greatest reformation idea that needed to be implemented in the UNSC. So voting for each issue will be anonymous. And then UN neutral representative will be collecting the vote, so there will be no bias. And then the collected votes are firm and unchangeable. Okay, so secondly, the democratic process. UNSC claim that they have this type of democratic essence in their voting system, but actually the permanent members, the five permanent members, hold the ultimate power in deciding any issue that are passed. Because they hold the veto power and any members, the 10 non-permanent members have exactly no say. Let's say that 10 of the non-permanent members decided that they are pro-Palestine, and then one major power or the one that hold veto power, which is the US, they are pro-Israel and they say this and that. And then they will need to follow US because they hold the major power. So uh, there's zero democratic essence in the voting system in the UNSC as of currently. So votes are collected will be democratically. So this is the idea, and then no major power or veto power will decide any issue that will be passed, and then neutral randomly selected UN representative will be counting the vote. So thirdly is by amending the structure of the UNSC or the UN Charter needs to be amended. Firstly is because the increases of number in the member states. So in 1945, there are five permanent members and then 11 Security Council seats. And then the UN member states at that time were 51. And then in 1965, there are 5 and 15 non-permanent members, and then there are 118 UN member states. So double the rapidly increasing number of the UN member states. And then in 2020, the permanent member is still 5, and the non-permanent members is still 10, so 15. So there's exactly zero changes, and then the UN member states as of now is around 193. So there's exactly zero changes in the non-permanent members. So I think this is one of the changes that needed to be made in order for all of the countries' voices to be heard. And then the permanent, maybe I think the idea of permanent members needed to be amended also, because they are holding most of the powers, and they hold too much power objectively. And then secondly, the changes in the regional composition of the United Nations membership. So for example, the Asia Pacific groups that hold 54 member states in the UN, with more than half of the world population. Despite its considerably growth, Asia is currently represented in the council by a number to only 1/5 of the member states, which is China and two other non-permanent members. Um, and then, it is seems unfair, generally speaking. So that also needed to be amended. And then uh, for another example is Africa also counts for more than one to fourth of the member states. However, there's no permanent seat for Africa and only three non-permanent seats. So, despite being one of the largest region in the world, they don't have any permanent members seat, and then they only have three non-permanent member seat. So, there is also one of the example, and for a credible and effective representative security council, an enhanced role of countries with the capacity and willingness to contribute to international peace and security and of developing country is imperative. So lastly is by emphasizing on international peacekeeping. A compulsory allocation for each member states to allocate a certain amount of manpower to the UN, a percentage of a population of one country will be calculated, and that percentage will be sent as a manpower to the UN. And then this will ultimately be used by the UN to keep the treaty or peace treaty that will be made between all country to the one that breach will face heavy consequences from all member states and the UN. So there will be no major power, no veto power, and no anything. Just the modern idea of equality. Every country will be treated equally, and the one that breach will also be punished, or will also be getting will face the heavy consequences equally. All country will face it equally. No other country in the UN uh, will be will be left aside.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Azri Fazli bin Azlan and my metric number is 1914427. And I will present why the veto power is flawed or the weaknesses of the veto power. So, generally, the veto powers allow the power of five to reject any resolution that does not benefit their country or their country allies from the aspect of economic or politics. So, the veto power can be used regardless of the vote of the majority and how important the decision may affect escalate a conflict. So, the first reason why the veto power is weak is the veto power is obviously disregard to the democracy. So, as we know from the Article 2 of the UN Charter, states that all members of the UN must be equal. So, this suggests that all nations must be given equal power, influence, and authority when it comes to making a global decision. So, by giving a few countries the ability to overrule any decision rather than the vote of the majority, here it shows they have strict the whole organization that mentioned as a democracy system. Then, the second reason is the veto power extend and escalate the global conflict. So, as we can see, the lack of democracy that I have mentioned earlier allow the Power Five to manipulate global conflict to suit their country's political or economic interests. For example, that I can give here is many decisions is made to help the humanitarian crisis in Syria have been repeatedly vetoed by China and Russia. So, China and Russia hesitate to help the crisis in Syria because it can be linked to their political and economic benefit from the war. So, Syria is a major importer of the Russia firearms and defense equipment, while China has been the second longest non-Arab investor in Syria. So, both countries have a lot to lose from the end of the crisis. So, they use their veto power. So, as here, we can show that they actually not in interest of humanity, but for their own. They do that because to gain something and get a benefit for their country. Next, third reason why veto power is weak is because of the veto power is actually undermines the developing countries. So for example here, despite of having the largest number of underdeveloped nation and member state in the UN, as example, Africa has no representation in the United Nations Security Council or UNSC. So Africa has no right, any right to have the veto power. So it is making, so as we know, generally it is making sense for these underdeveloped countries needs for the international support from others. But they have a minimal influence on the global situation around them. So here, the UN seems likely provided them with a limited opportunity of growth and advancement in the certain aspect. So regarding that, this has left this country, it needs the country to channel their limited and insufficient resources to purchase heavy firearm for their country itself as a defense against the external threats instead of investing the money in their own country infrastructure. So here we can see that why veto power is weak. Before that, we must know, therefore, in the first place, the increasing of the global security threats and the reversing effort that made by the UN is the main reason for this issue. In conclusion, even the member of the United Nations Security Council hold indisputable importance and power in the UN. In my opinion, I believe and agree that veto power must be remain, but more countries should be given the right to have the more power, and the system of the veto power also need to be reformed. So countries with rapidly growing economy should be given the right to have the veto, and from that they will gain international support from any side. And last from me, I think the country who can have the veto power should be prohibited from extending the conflict that they are in the part of it, or the conflict that they may gain benefit from it, because their opinion will be biased and unfair. So that's all from me. Thank you.